You can get rich and wealthy working a 9-to-5 corporate role, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. When I reflect over my story, I started my career about 13 years ago, and during that time I was torn because I was always thinking to myself, I know I wanted to attain wealth, I know I wanted to be rich, I know I wanted to be able to live the type of lifestyle that, God willing and God thank you, I'm able to live now. But at the time, it was really difficult to see because so much of the narrative online was really focused around the fact that you need to start a business, you need to be an entrepreneur, and that there's only really one linear path to be able to attain wealth in life. But I remember several years into my career, I worked for a company called Twilio. This is a company that basically empowers cloud communications, as we would call it. So if you think about most of the apps on your phone, whenever you're receiving a text message or an audio call, a lot of that is powered by Twilio. So I worked for this company. They went through what's called an IPO, which is basically where they get listed on the New York Stock Exchange, and they're made to be a publicly traded company, which allows other people to, in essence, buy shares and stock within that business. So I joined that company. I was there for 3 years, did very, very well as one of the top performing salespeople. But the thing that stood out to me is because they're publicly traded, it means that the salaries and the income of the C-suite executives, so I'm talking the CEO, the CFO, the chief marketing officer, all of these roles, their salaries and their income is publicly available. So you could even right now go onto Twilio's website, TWILIO, you can go on their investor relations page, and you can actually go and look up the compensation of the C-suite executives. And I was seeing that when I combined their salaries, their bonuses, and their stocks, they were earning, it was a range anywhere from 3 million up to, in certain positions, 30 million, including their stock packages. And so I was confused because I thought, well, the narrative has always been that you need to work for someone in order to become a millionaire. You need to work for yourself in order to become a millionaire. You certainly a multi-millionaire, right? You need to be able to be a part of creating your own organization, hiring staff, firing staff, going through that entire process over many years and taking the risk, in essence, to set and start up a business to then become wealthy. So I'm thinking, how are all of these people making this much money when that's so supposedly been the narrative my whole life? And so I started to see the world differently. I thought, actually, if you're a part of the right type of organization and you're able to build a skill set that allows you to add tremendous value to the marketplace, you can become rich and wealthy working for someone else or working for a company. It's really all about the intrinsic value that you're able to add to the marketplace, and then being in the right type of organization to grow and attain at least a base level of wealth. But then bigger than that, I started to look at where actually most of the capital and most of the wealth was coming from for these particular individuals. And what I started to notice was that the mass proportion, or the largest portion of their wealth and net worth, was actually coming from stock. It wasn't coming necessarily from their income, as much as some of them had a base salary of 400,000 and then bonuses that meant that they made $1 million. The stock packages were what were worth 10, 20, 30 million dollars. So I started to see that's actually where the money is really coming from. It's owning stock, it's owning equity within other businesses. That's really the true path to freedom. So I became super curious. I was fortunate enough to have a stock package myself at that company, which vested each year, which basically meant I got 25% of the total each year I was at the company. They used that as an incentive to basically keep you there. But I started to become more and more fascinated about understanding more about, well, how could I just own more stock in general? How can I own other pieces or pieces of other companies to continue to support my own wealth building journey? And that's where I came across just the concept of stock investing holistically, not just receiving equity from a company I was working from, but starting to see that I could use the income that I was earning from my day job, that I could then invest in the stock market to then multiply my money to be able to build and attain sustainable long-term wealth. And this is where the concept of knowing that you can become rich and wealthy actually while having a 9-to-5 job kicked into my mind. Whereas the narrative really generally tells you otherwise. The market tends to tell you otherwise, but it's absolutely not true. I was just having a look on Grok, which is basically Elon Musk's AI engine, and I was asking it some questions, right? Now, there's multiple different ways in which you could become a millionaire through stock investing, right? And this is while you are currently working a job. Now, there's slower paths that are less risky, and then there's slightly more accelerated paths which naturally carry a little bit more risk. So for example, if you were going conservative and you were investing $1,000 a month over a 10-year period, you'd have over $200,000 if there was a 10% annual return on your money over that 10-year period. Now, for some of you, you might be saying, well, Alex, that's too slow. I need to be able to make money faster. And I get that. But at the same time, you've got to ask yourself, would you value a surefire way to be able to attain wealth in a sustainable manner versus just basically going hell for leather, taking on something with extreme risk, which means that you can also stand to lose it all, right? You have to understand that in life, risk is bi-directional. So yes, you may end up earning tons and tons of cash, but you could also lose it. So that's one surefire way. But when we look at the bigger picture with stock investing, I looked and I asked Grok, I said, when you take Amazon, Tesla, and Meta, otherwise known as Facebook, what have been their annualized returns over the last 10 years on average? All of them are over 900%, which means that any money that you had put in to those companies over the last 10 years, you would have more than 900% a return on your money, whatever it is that you'd invested. So even with a minuscule amount of money invested, you'd have been able to become a multi-millionaire if you had taken the decision to invest in those companies early. And so the point is here, what I looked at is if you were putting $1,000 per month into a stock plan, for example, and just getting a 40% return annually. Now, to be clear, 40% is aggressive. And if you ask any investor, any advisor, they would say 40% is very aggressive. You tend to look for about 10% a year. But I know that 40% is absolutely achievable because I've been averaging more than that for quite some time. If you choose the right types of stocks and you're smart, if you get 40% return on $1,000 invested each month over a 10-year period, you'd have $1 million in that time. So when you think about it, you're now working a 9 to 5, doing the job that you're doing. Hopefully you're enjoying the role that you're doing. And you then can put in place a pretty much surefire way for you to be able to have $1 million or more over a 10-year period. And again, as mentioned, if you want to play a slightly riskier game, you can invest in riskier stocks, which could give you the opportunity to get 100, 200%, 1,000% return on your money, right? The reality is it's all about making smart decisions about the stocks which you choose to invest in. You've got to think about the rationale behind your decision making with those stocks, because of course, what you're basically doing is researching companies and then taking an informed judgment on which ones you feel have the best opportunity to innovate and sustain in the future. Because when you think about a company such as Amazon, when you think about a company such as Meta, what they have is phenomenal leaders, generational leaders that are pushing those companies forward. And it's ultimately their hard work and their innovation that then raises the stock price. And by doing that, that's how you're then able to make a return on your money. You're pretty much making a bet on a company. You're making a bet on a founder. You're making a bet on a leadership team that this company, the space they're in, the industry that they're in, this is going to be a company that's going to be generational. They're going to be around for an extended period of time. And by virtue of that, as an investor, you'll be able to get a return and basically share in the success of that company based on the fact that you chose to make that investment. So if you're working a 9 to 5 right now, don't get caught up in the hype cycle that you need to go out and risk starting a business, taking on the headache of payroll and HR, knowing that, the percentile on successful businesses is so minuscule that your chances of being able to be successful with it are tiny. And that doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't do it, but you should certainly make sure that you've got a much more surefire way to build sustainable wealth over an extended period. And by investing in stock alongside your existing role, what you have is safety and a much more consistent and sustainable way to become wealthy without necessarily carrying the extensive burden of running payroll, running HR, and having to figure out how to start, run and operate a company and not have much balance in your life by virtue of that. I hope this video has been helpful. I'll leave some links in the description box below so you can continue the journey with me, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Until then, keep climbing.